Kristen has worked at Southport School for 6 years. She is an education technology consultant. She has a BA in psychology and her master's in education. And she has done some really amazing things using Keynote. So I'm excited that she's going to share it all with you today. And I hope you get a lot out of this session. And Kristen, I'll switch it over to you now.
Awesome. Hi, guys. Thank you. I see some familiar faces. So hello to everybody. Hope everyone's hanging in there. So for today, I'm going to go over some stuff with Keynote. I'm going to share my screen with you so you guys can see. I'm going to be working through Keynote for the whole session. All right. So basically, just long story short, as a teacher, something I've always been really passionate about is finding ways for my students, regardless of if they need extra support or not, to unlock material in a way that's successful oriented for them. And I've just always found that Keynote was a really great tool for me to be able to do that. So I'm going to I'll go through just the basics of what we're going to be talking about today, just some of the notable features in Keynote, especially given this current distance learning environment. So one of the features that I love is the audio recordings. We'll be talking a lot about that, how you can upload worksheets either from your desktop or if you have physical worksheets that you're working with, the commenting feature, how to create teacher-created models, which you can share with your students, using an animations feature to kind of bring their work to life. I'm going to share with you some specific published pieces by some of my former students, and then I'll teach you how to share and collaborate with your students so you can give them these Keynote presentations that you make. So just some of the basics. Up here is known as the toolbar. So just so you can see and know what some of these things do. Up here is just where you would add a new slide. And if you're familiar with PowerPoint or Google Slides, it's the same idea, where if you're adding a new slide, it gives you different formatting options to work with. Play is used if you're teaching, for example, live and you want it to look kind of like a slideshow, you would use that feature. Keynote Live is similar to Zoom, where you would give your students a link or a password and you could share it with them. And it's done in live format, just kind of like how we're doing it right now. And then there's the table, the chart, text, shapes, which there's a ton of different shape objects in here, which is neat. Media, this is where you can access your own photos. If you upload a movie, you can put music. The record audio feature, which we'll be talking about. You can take a photo, scan documents, and do some sketching and add comments as well. So that's kind of all up here in this toolbar. And it's the same if you're using an iPad or if you're using a desktop. And it's the same if a student's accessing it or a teacher. So it's going to look the same for everybody, which is nice because you as a teacher can visualize exactly where they are when they're asking for help. Over here, if you click on your text, for example, so I put this text box in myself. If you come over here and hit text on the side, this is where you can play around with the sizing of the font, the kind of font that you want, bullet notes, etc. But one of my favorite features is over here in Arrange. So if it's text or if you're uploading a picture, whatever it is that's on your page, you have the ability to lock it, which is really nice for a number of reasons. First of all, as a teacher, you know, a student says, oh, I didn't see question number 5 there. You can say, yes, it was there. They physically cannot delete it. It's also nice because if they're messing around on their Keynote, things aren't kind of jumping all over the place. Sometimes they get frustrated when they try and type something new in and it bumps other things all over the place. So you can lock it and it stays put exactly how you made it. And then the highlighting feature is just kind of hidden, so I figured I'd show you that. If you're just going over and you select the text that you want to highlight for them, you have to come up here to insert, and then the highlight button is right up top. It's just kind of hidden, so I figured I'd point that one out to you. So for audio recordings, that's going to be the first session that we talk about today. For you teachers, I think it's super helpful because I use it a lot to record myself reading directions for my students. You know, whether the decoding level is a little bit too tricky for them, whether they're auditory learners, it's just so helpful to have that ability to read the directions to them. You can also use it to teach the content. You can record a whole lesson just using the audio feature. And you can also provide individual feedback on student work. We all know how important it is to give specific, you know, feedback to our students. So you could go on there and just say, great job, Brian, on mastering that AI/AY rule. And especially in a time like this, they love to hear your voice, I'm sure. And then on the student end, if they wanted to use the recording feature, it's great for them to practice reading fluency, to answer some open-ended questions for comprehension, or to even ask questions, you know, either from the comprehension standpoint of asking questions, or if they just had a question that they wanted to ask you as the teacher. And if it's tricky for them to type it out, they could just quickly record themselves asking the question and you would get it. So to do that, I'm just going to scoot this down. You come up here to media, and then you go to record audio, and the little record audio box will come up. You press red to record. This is me recording. You have the option to preview it just to make sure there's no background noise and it all came out clear. You can edit it if you want to trim down your audio a little bit, if you went over or whatever. But if you're happy with it, you just go ahead and hit insert and the little bubble will come up. So that's exactly what your recording is, and they just tap record. This is me recording. And again, you can lock that feature there so that way it doesn't disappear off of their page for any reason. Next, I'm just going to show you how you can upload worksheets. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. If you have a worksheet that you're working with that's on your computer, the easiest way I would recommend doing it is if it's saved onto your desktop, like right over here, and then you can just take it and drag it right onto the slide that you're working on. So it's easy as that. You don't have to upload anything. It's just right there for you. If you are working with a worksheet, for example, from like if you have a workbook at home or you have a paper worksheet that you printed, there is a way to do that too. There's a scan feature, which is really neat. It's most helpful though if you have your laptop synced up with your iPhone or your iPad, if you're working on two different devices. And by having them synced, all I mean is just having them logged in on your Apple iTunes account on both ends. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you come up to media again and you click scan documents. And then automatically my phone is just lighting up right now with my camera. So I take a picture of whatever document I wanted to take a picture of to upload. And at the time I'm on maternity leave, so all I have is a Mickey Mouse coloring book, but it just comes right up there and it comes out a lot cleaner than if you were to take a picture of it. So you could do that scanning feature as well. And if you're just working directly on your iPad, you don't need to worry about the syncing. It'll just, you can use it right from there.
Hey, Kristen, can I just interrupt quickly?
Go ahead.
We have a question. Can
Yep.
Keynote documents be put into a Google Classroom?
Yes, at the end, I'm going to show you exactly how you'll share it to your students.
Thank you.
Yep. So this is just an example of how I took some of the features we've talked about with the audio recordings and uploading a worksheet and kind of turned it into more of an activity that they would probably use in the classroom as opposed to just, you know, here's this worksheet, fill it out. So I uploaded the worksheet using the scan tool. I'm having the students highlight the AY words, write the word under the matching picture. Then I'm going to have them record themselves reading the word just to take it a little bit of a step further. And especially, you know, given right now with the distance learning, that's something you would probably have them do in the classroom anyway, is have them practice reading the words out loud. So from a teacher standpoint, it's helpful that you can really hear their decoding and you can go back and see, you know, where they struggle and where they're succeeding with those words. And then pick 2 words to write in a complete sentence. So I recorded myself giving each of those directions separately. I just felt like it's super helpful for students who need steps broken down into smaller pieces to go back and just have to listen to one rather than listening to the entire directions all at once. So that's just an example of a good worksheet that you can kind of have fun with. From there is the commenting tool. So from there, that's up in this toolbox right up here. For teachers, that could be helpful for you just to provide student feedback. And it comes up like a little sticky note, which I'll show you on the next slide. And also just to give some suggestions or to give some clarification on something. Students also can comment back to you. So they can ask a specific question relating to content on the page. They can actually reply to your original comment, which I'll show you in a second. And if you have the ability to have your students all working together on something, which I'll show you at the end, how you can have all the students collaborating on one Keynote, it's really a great opportunity for the students to peer edit and to still give them that opportunity to work together from a distance learning environment. So here's just a quick little example. Up here I have my paragraph of my quarantine adventure. So this is what it would look like on their end. If they see a sticky note, it's just going to come up as this little yellow square. So you would click it and you'll see exactly what the comment is. And in order to insert a comment, you come up, you click on the text that you want, click comment. You can type what you need, so capitals for titles and names, quick little reminder, hit done, and then you can see over there where they can reply, like, what do you mean quarantine needs an uppercase Q? Or you can delete it once you guys have talked about it. So it's nice that you can insert the comments exactly where you want the feedback to be. So from here, just sending teacher-created templates. This is going to be probably the biggest feature of Keynote, because the idea is that you as a teacher are going to be creating some kind of generic model, whether it's a worksheet, a whole unit, whatever it is that you want your students to access. And then you're going to share it with your students to work on so that they will in turn share it back to you. Just a quick note before we go into what that looks like. Just don't forget that if you want to use that lock feature, great. But if you want to use this kind of as a manipulative tool, for example, if you wanted to take some pictures and you want them to, manipulate them across the page, whether it's put dots underneath the syllables or taking a jumbled sentence and putting them in order, don't lock the features that you want them to be able to manipulate, because then they won't be able to access that. So a couple years ago, I used this in a writing class where we were doing a whole book on All Aboard the Polar Express. I was working with a first grade class at the time, so it was really important that I gave them a very clear expectation of what they needed to do and a very clear template for them to work off of. So up here, it's all blank because when I sent it with them, then they were able to personalize it however they felt fit. So on the title page, they could add whatever they wanted their cover illustration to be. In the blanks, that's where they were inserting the character's name, and then they were able to put themselves as the author. And then just going through, I put exactly how many pages I wanted them to use. I made text boxes for them, so that way they didn't have to, struggle with trying to figure out how to do that and using the transition words. And just real quick, in order to make a text box, I just find it easy to use the shape tool. So I just come up to the shapes, basic, and then I just picked a rectangle. And you can make the colors different and add text over it and stuff like that. But then when I sent it to the student, he was able to make it his own. So still following that template guideline, but he was able to go through and make his whole story. He added his pictures, added his text, and was able to just really put together a really cute little presentation on Keynote. I found a lot of my students in the past didn't really always feel comfortable with coloring and using their own pictures. Some just really were turned off by it. So I really love that in Keynote, it has all these different shape options where they can really get so creative in making their pictures come to life in their stories. So that's just a really great feature. Another way I've used the teacher creative models is for vocabulary. So I took this from a social studies unit we were doing on Thanksgiving. and I made a blank template using the vocabulary word we were discussing. I gave them the definition, and then their instructions, once they got the whole, it ended up being like a whole vocabulary journal. They had to say the words, so they would use the audio feature, write it, which they could type it in, they could use the pencil tool, whatever they feel comfortable with, and then use it. So they would put it in a sentence, and then down here they were able to upload an image. And then down here you can see this is an example of a student. So they said the word, they typed it out, they used it in a sentence, and then they drew a picture to go along with it, which is just so helpful to kind of have them see it come to life. And they're taking that vocabulary word and they're manipulating it in 3-4 different ways rather than just trying to memorize a definition. And then this is kind of a recent example of what I've been doing with Keynote. I took a whole reading unit and I made it interactive digitally. So I started just by using a picture book, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And I'll show you exactly what I did with this. I used Keynote to make like a more interactive reading lesson for my students. So I took the book Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I actually found a PDF version online. And through there, I picked out some of the vocabulary words, so similar to the last slide where I did that same vocabulary template that the kids were used to. They recorded themselves saying the word, defining the word, and using it. So this kind of almost became like a vocabulary notebook for them. And then I went through, and with that PDF I had found of the text, I just uploaded each page at a time, but I embedded questions in there, recorded myself reading those questions for those students who needed that. And then they had the choice of either, typing their responses or orally responding in there. I also recorded myself here reading the text to the students. And I found that this was super helpful for those who needed to kind of go back and, have that reinforcement and that spiral review. But within there, I was really able to embed a bunch of different kinds of the features of Keynote. So like in question number 1, I asked the students to highlight and record the sentence that shows where and when the story was taking place. So then this student went back, she used her highlighting tool to highlight that it took place in the kitchen on Saturday morning. I was able to kind of throw in some reading comprehension strategies such as predicting and circling evidence. What flew through the air, she went back, she created a circle around the pancake to kind of, really reinforce the evidence in that text. And like I said, she was able to go back and respond using text or orally responding either way. But I just kind of went through the entire book, and, even if you can't find a PDF online, you can upload pictures by using the scan feature of picture books. It's really up to you, but I found this to be super helpful just so students can kind of work at their own pace, and they could have that reinforcement of, if they missed something on one page, they could kind of go back and they could listen to me reading it to them one more time. All right, is everyone good with that? I know that was kind of like a lot all at once. Okay, we're good. Okay, so then from there, this is a little bit more sophisticated, I guess I'll say, using the animation feature. So this is really cool for teachers because if you're teaching science or a math concept, for example, you could show some kind of process, for example, a life cycle, which I'll show you in a second. And it's really neat for those students who need that visual and need that multi-sensory learning in a digital format. For students to use animation, it's kind of cool because they can show you and demonstrate their understanding of a process strategy, and they can make their work come to life, which is obviously so fun for them. So over here, I just did an example using the life cycle of a butterfly, and I'll show you exactly how I made that come to life. Here, I'm just using the life cycle of a butterfly. I picked the 4 images that I wanted to use beforehand. I just copied them right off of Google. And then what you do is you come right up here where you had your format, animate, or document. Go ahead and click on animate. There's a few different options here. You could build an image in where basically it flies onto the slide. You can build something out or an image just disappears off of the slide. In this case, I'm going to do an action. So I'm going to go ahead and add an effect. And what they have here are a few different options. These are kind of more like visuals. So you can have it blank, for example. You could have it bounce around, whatever, but I'm going to have it just move. So basic, it's just going to move from left to right. But in this case, since I want it to flow more of like a cycle, this red line, I just take the picture and I move it to where I want it to go. So now it's going to automatically, when I click, this is going to be the first animation that it does. And then you can see here, it can ease in or ease out where the picture kind of starts to fade. So that's just moving the image. Now I want it to disappear after so that the students understand that in the life cycle of a butterfly, the eggs don't stay eggs the whole time. The eggs hatch and they turn into caterpillars. So I'm going to add another action over here, which is opacity, and I'm going to have it all the way down to 0%, so that way it disappears. And then I'll show you how the whole thing works. I would do the same thing for each image, obviously, but just so you can see quickly, you can test it by going up here where it says play. And I had done it where it automatically sets it up where for each time you click your mouse or you click your trackpad, that's when an animation is going to happen. So I'm going to click now, that's the moving, and then it disappears. So that's using the animation feature, just using the different life cycle. But again, there's so many different ways that you could implement it. I had actually used it a couple years ago in a writing piece where the students each had to pick their favorite superpower. So this is just an example of how, from a student's point of view, how they could use the animation feature in their own work. With a first grade class, it was a persuasive unit, and the students each picked a superpower that they wanted to try and persuade the other kids as to why it was the best superpower to them. So the student picked invisibility, and she just kind of used the cute little basic features of animation to kind of reinforce her points as to why this was the best superpower. So when you go into play mode and you click, each transition or animation comes into play. So her first point was she could take her teacher's computer and hide it, which that's me, and off I go. She could steal cake and no one would notice. She did a little disappearing animation, and that the invisibility power can spread to other objects, and then it goes away. And her concluding sentence, she just makes it fade away. But it really just made her writing piece come to life that much more. And I've really found too, I was always just so nervous that, I had to teach the kids explicitly, okay, you have to use this action, you have to use this action. But they're so tech savvy these days, and just giving them the opportunity to be creative and play around with that feature, I found played off so much more in the end, and they just became so surprisingly creative when it came to this tool. By the end of the year, I was just so blown away by it. And then, just different published work samples that my students have done throughout the years. I've had them upload videos. So for some of my students that were younger, using the writing process, it wasn't always easy for them to type or to dictate everything. So they recorded themselves doing little videos on how to make a pizza. And then they were able to go back and listen to themselves speaking in their video to type in their text, which you can see here.
Wall. The door was rolling. What's the rolling pin? I put the sauce on the dough. Put the toppings on top. Start putting the pizza in the oven for 1 minute. Quick pizza.
So that's just one example of a writing piece. And then this is another one where the student went through and she was able to, she typed it first, and then she went through and she recorded herself reading each of her pages, which I found to be helpful because you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. She's typing, she's getting that practice, and then she's also getting the reading fluency practice in as well, which was helpful for her. And then last but not least, obviously, you're probably wondering, how do I get all these Keynote projects to my students? So there's a couple of ways to do that. First, you could do it through email. So if you come up here to share, you can send a copy via email. Sometimes the file's a little bit big, so that, you know, that could be tricky sometimes, depending on how big of the unit you made. If you are in person, you could airdrop it to their device. Given right now, that's obviously not very ideal, but just to keep in mind for the future, those are two ways that you could do it. You could also use the Collaborate tool, which is right up here. The only stipulations with that is the students must have an Apple ID in order to do it, because when you could hit Collaborate, you have to type in their Apple ID in order to do it and share it with them. But the cool thing about that is if you are able to do this with your students, everyone's working on the same document. So if it's kind of like a live lesson where if you want the students to all brainstorm on the same page, they can all see each other's ideas. Like how I was saying before with the commenting feature, they can comment on each other's work and have that experience of peer editing. So it's definitely a really neat feature if you can sync it up that way with your students. And then I know a ton of us are using Google Classroom right now, so I'll show you quickly just how you can upload this to Keynote or to Google Classroom for you guys. So you come up here to classwork, you hit create, and then assignment, just like normal. Title it whatever you needed to. I just did the date. Click add. It has to be saved into your Google Drive. And then you just go ahead and click on the Keynote that you want, hit add. And then over here where it says students can view file, make a copy for each student. And then you click assign. But making a copy for each student makes it so that they each get their own copy. And they're not all working on your master copy, which is helpful. And then they can just turn it into you over there in the turn in piece. And on their end, they're going to have to download it onto whatever device they have. But then once it's on there, it stays in Keynote and they can access it whenever they open up Keynote. It just stays in their file. So it'll be saved onto that document. Okay, so that's what I have for you guys today on Keynote. I hope you guys learned a lot about how many, you know, really neat tools are on here. I've loved it. But if anyone has any questions, I guess now's a good time. You can email them or we can ask them now.
If anybody has any questions, if you want to unmute yourself, I think there's a small enough amount of us that we can have questions. I have one in the chat box, so I'll start with that.
Cool.
Does the student and teacher have to have an Apple product to utilize Keynote? And the answer, I think, for that is yes. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is an Apple app. So both ends, you guys would both need an Apple product.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes. So is there a way for like a whole class setting or small group to differentiate within that group? So is there a way, maybe, I don't know if the answer would be that you'd make a copy for one student and then add maybe the reading of directions or the reading of the text in a like separate Keynote or something that's differentiated. Would you do that and then share it to the students, like share the one that you want them to use?
Yeah, so you could do it that way where you just, you share like one big master copy and then, you can like do a file and then you could just make a new one and kind of copy the slides off of each one that you want it to be the same and then switch up some things that you needed to be different. Another way you could do it too is you could kind of assign certain students each slides if you wanted to. Like you could just do like these students are working on slides 1 and 2. These students work on slides 3 and 4. You could like color code them by groups.
Okay. And is there a way for the kids to see, just for like confidentiality reasons for differentiation, is there a way for them to see what other kids have access to which documents or no?
Nope. So they'll just see whatever you title it.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.